Coming up next, Air Combat brings you the story of the visionary designers who created the Mustang, the Spitfire, the Zero, and the Messerschmitt. Then Scorpions in a Bottle unfolds the secret history of the atomic bomb. And log on at veterans.com, a new website brought to you by the History Channel. Veterans.com, a place where veterans, their families, and others can connect, share stories, and pass on the legacies of all American veterans.
All washed up.
And for everyone who's
Over the hill.
AARP, we're a little different than you might think. Sure, our members are putting their feet up, but they're definitely not retiring. They're just like you. They're in their 50s. They're fit, fun, and ready for more. Call now to become a part of AARP. Membership is just $10. With your membership, you'll get a subscription to a great magazine. You'll also get all kinds of information on finances, health the year older. Call now and join. With your membership card, you can even take advantage of an AARP when you're riding off into the sunset.
Military History, brought to you in part by Oldsmobile.
I'm Edward Herman. Welcome to Air Combat. Coming up, the race for air supremacy in World War II. Germany had its dive bombers, Japan had the deadliest fighter planes in the world, and the Allies had to catch up. By the late 1930s, war was brewing in Europe and the Pacific, and for the first time, air power would be decisive. Join us next on Our Century.
Witness the events that have shaped our lives. Witness the history. Witness our century.
I'm Edward Herman. This episode of Air Combat tells the story of the great military buildup before and during World War II. In the 30s, new German warplanes were unveiled during the Spanish Civil War, while Japanese aircraft flew long-range bombing missions over China. For Germany and Japan, these small wars were a dress rehearsal, one last chance to get ready for what was to come. For the Allies, they were a wake-up call.
From 1939 to 1945, in the air over Europe and the Pacific, warring nations engaged in a deadly race to rule the skies. In air war, the fates of men and nations depend as much upon the powers of their machines as on the courage and skill of the men who fly them. Once committed to battle, a technical problem left unsolved months or even years before by aeronautical designers can mean death and destruction to even the bravest and most experienced flyer. Air combat in World War II was a battle that began on the drawing boards. It was a battle of imagination and vision, waged by engineers and designers in labs and machine shops, in death-defying test flights, in the arena of international competition, and on the production line. Lives hung in the balance. And in the crucible of a modern air war, the clock was always ticking. Summer 1940. The Luftwaffe is poised at the English Channel, its eyes on Britain. The Empire of Japan casts hungry eyes on the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. And the whole world teeters on the brink of total war. The combat use of aircraft evolved during the First World War from simple reconnaissance of enemy positions to aerial bombardment and airborne combat. But with the advent of the dogfight, whomever's plane could dive faster, climb quicker, turn more sharply, stay aloft longer, support heavier and more accurate armament, held the advantage. And such technical advantages often spelled the difference between life and death, victory and defeat. 1918. The war to end all wars is over. The aces and aviators who survive are mustered out. Those who remain in the skeletal air forces become unwanted stepchildren of their nation's armies and navies. But the quest for supremacy in the air didn't end with the armistice. The pilots, addicted to flight, apply their aerial acrobatic skills to barnstorming. Others turn to commercial aviation. Air races multiply and reach a fever pitch. These races are tests of speed and endurance, exhibitions of national pride and the development of powerful new aircraft. Yet these races will soon become the testing ground for aircraft which will have to form the backbone of a new Allied force to counter the threat of growing Axis armadas. The Schneider Trophy air race for seaplanes, begun in 1919, is quickly established as one of the world's most important international competitions. In 1929, Britain wins the Schneider Cup with an experimental all-metal monoplane, the Supermarine S6. This aircraft is the creation of R.J. Mitchell, chief aviation designer for the Supermarine Works at Southampton. Designing and building aircraft for the race, however, is expensive. Sir Hugh Trenchard, Chief of the Royal Air Force, concerned with England's defense capabilities, pushes the Treasury to fund Mitchell's projects. But in 1930, a disarmament-conscious Labour government rules the Schneider Trophy race a sporting event, not to be supported by public funds. To Mitchell and the RAF command, all seems lost. Until Lady Fanny Houston, a wealthy and outspoken patriot and suffragette, steps forth and offers the then prodigious sum of £100,000 to sustain the British effort. Saved by Lady Houston's gift, Mitchell's 1931 model, with its distinctive elliptical wing, designed to reduce drag and increase speed, sets a new world airspeed record of 407 miles per hour. This is 200 miles per hour faster than the RAF's then best fighter, the Hawker Fury. 1933. Trenchard and others in the Air Ministry, troubled by the rise of Nazism and a new belligerence in Germany, suspect that Germany's state-owned civilian airline, Lufthansa, is in fact a cover for an emerging secret air force. When Hitler appoints a veteran World War I aviator named Hermann Göring as the new Minister of Civil Aviation, the British now fear that the real goal of the reborn German aviation industry is offensive air power. At the Bayer Air Works is the gifted designer Professor Willy Messerschmitt. And at Focke-Wulf, Professor Kurt Tonk has assembled a team of top flight engineers. Their intentions seem anything but peaceful. To replace the Fury, the British Air Ministry returns to Hawker to give them a single-seat high-speed monoplane fighter. The Air Ministers also see in Mitchell's high-speed, high-performance seaplanes the seeds of an RAF fighter to rival the next generation Hawker. Mitchell, a man of few words, reserves his eloquence for the drafting table. He replaces the pontoon floats of his seaplane with wide carriage retractable landing gear. He encloses the cockpit and refines his already sleek metal skin fuselage and elliptical wing. Both Hawker and Supermarine designed their new planes in anticipation of an engine more efficient and more powerful than anything the British have built before. Designated the Rolls-Royce 1200 Merlin, Sir Henry Royce promises delivery by mid-1934. That same summer, Goering orders Willy Messerschmitt to design a single-seat interceptor fighter, utilizing the smallest possible airframe with the most powerful engine available. Messerschmitt's prototype uses the Rolls-Royce Kestrel, the best engine then available on the open market. October 1936. At the now infamous Berlin Olympic Games, in a roaring pass over the Olympic complex, the Allies are unpleasantly surprised as the fruit of Messerschmitt's genius is finally revealed: the Me-109. 2 weeks later, the RAF debuts its new Hawker Hurricane. Then, less than 6 months later, Supermarine's long-awaited answer to the Me-109 takes off from Hampshire on the maiden flight of Mitchell's graceful bird of prey, the Spitfire. Both Spitfire and Hurricane use the new Merlin engine. Convinced that in the face of the growing Nazi buildup, the Air Ministry will soon be placing big orders for Hurricane fighters, Hawker decides to go ahead with mass production of the Hurricane. The gamble pays off. 3 months later, the government places its first order for 600 planes. On the same day, the government also orders 310 Spitfires from Supermarine. With the Messerschmitt plant at Regensburg gearing up for production of the Me-109, comparisons between British and German fighters are inevitable. Hitler, now openly flaunting his growing power, trumpets the superiority of the 109. Goering, now commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, sends an Me-109 demonstration team to the 1937 International Flying Meet in Zurich. The Allies are stunned as the Messerschmitt dominates the field of military aircraft in both the speed and dive and climb competitions. The reality of new German air power is sobering. The race immediately intensifies. Supermarine begins modifying the Spitfire to improve its performance. At Hawker, the Hurricane is given a new engine and armament. But the Me-109 is fitted with a new direct fuel injection engine and a variable pitch propeller. New cannons give it a heavier punch than the Spitfire and Hurricane. As each side now works to improve its fighters, the other side matches and parries. But unlike the air races of the early 30s, the world begins to fear this is a race whose winner will be decided in the skies, in air-to-air combat.
Our century will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
Introducing the entirely new 2001 Aurora by Oldsmobile.
Technology.
Suicide missions with HAZMAT, the Hazardous Materials Response Squad. Then a bomb plot backfires inside Hitler's Wolf's Lair, and the French army mutinies on military blunders, followed by History Undercover as Rommel and Montgomery duel in the deserts of North Africa. Guts and Glory Sunday presents Suicide Missions, Military Blunders, History Undercover. Tomorrow night, beginning at 8 on the History Channel.
Our century returns to air combat, the race to rule the skies.
Dawn, September 1st, 1939. The Luftwaffe streaks into Poland, destroying the Polish Air Force on the ground. The mechanized ground forces of the Reich thunder across the border. In 18 days, Poland falls. For the first time, air power has been used to strike the first blow with devastating effect. The world is shocked at the blinding speed with which Germany conquers Holland. Belgium, Scandinavia, and France. The weaknesses of British aircraft become brutally obvious when, in defending their French allies, over half the RAF's fighters are lost. July 16, 1940. His aggression now naked to the world, Hitler is furious that England will not surrender. He decides to invade. Before launching Operation Sea Lion, the Luftwaffe will soften British defenses in a massive assault from the air. In previous combat over Europe, when Spitfires and Hurricanes tried to pursue the Messerschmitt fighters above 20,000 feet, they performed poorly. And worse, British intelligence estimates that the Luftwaffe outnumber its aircraft somewhere between 3 or 5 to 1. The Luftwaffe's fighters, proven in the Spanish Civil War and all across Europe, are on the whole technically superior to anything in the RAF arsenal. Britain, however, has one technical advantage. Robert Watson Watt, a meteorological scientist, has perfected a radio detecting and ranging system. Radar. By mid-1940, a chain of early warning radar stations are in place from the Isle of Wight on the Channel coast to the River Tees on the North Sea. Enemy aircraft can be detected at 100 miles. British fighters do not need to patrol. They can remain on the ground, conserving fuel, and take to the skies at the last possible moment. The British brace for attack. Intelligence indicates over 3,500 warplanes poised at bases all over Europe. England has thousands of aircraft on order or in production, but the RAF has only 700 fighters with which to defend its skies. Then, on the night of June 5th, 30 German bombers stage a small raid on coastal airfields. The British prepare for the worst. Yet for no apparent reason, Hitler hesitates, giving the British precious time to continue making last-minute modifications. If anything can be done to improve the RAF fighter, now is the time. The Hurricane and Spitfire are not up to the standards of the ME-109 with its variable pitch propeller. In close pursuit at high altitudes, the difference in performance could prove fatal to RAF pilots. A single Spitfire is converted to a variable pitch propeller. The results are stunning. 7,000 feet are added to its ceiling. The Spitfire can now maneuver better at high altitudes, take off even more quickly, and climb steeply. Without waiting for approval from the Air Ministry, Sir Hugh Dowding, Chief of Fighter Command, orders every fighter in the RAF converted. Within a month, the job is done. August 13th, 1940. The German High Command calls it Eagle's Day. Its mission? To wipe out the RAF on the ground and in the air while smashing Britain's network of early warning radar and crippling its aircraft production facilities. But Eagle's Day is not the success the Luftwaffe hoped for. The improved Spitfires and Hurricanes attack out of the sun. Avoiding the Messerschmitt fighter escorts, they take out Stuka dive bombers and Junkers 88 medium bombers with their wing-mounted guns. August 15th, 1100 hours. Radar screens in Kent light up. Huge formations of German aircraft are gathering over Calais across the Channel. 30 minutes later, Stuka dive bombers with their ME-109 escorts pass the cliffs of Dover. Further north, 3 large enemy formations pour in from the North Sea. Almost simultaneously, a fleet of unescorted Junkers 88s from Denmark make landfall in North Anglia. The Battle of Britain is on. The backbone of the Luftwaffe is its Junkers Ju-88, a medium bomber with the speed of a fighter. But the German bombers reveal one fatal design flaw. They lack tail guns. When Spitfires and Hurricanes attack from behind, the bombers are vulnerable. However, during radical maneuvers, the carburetor-fed engines of the Spitfires and Hurricanes sputter or cut out. The fuel-injected Messerschmitts do not. In high-altitude tight combat, the Messerschmitts generally prevail. But the Me-109's cruising range is limited. After the long approach to England, they can either stay close to the bombers or pursue the British fighters. They can't do both. Unwilling to sacrifice his precious bombers, Goering makes a major mistake. He orders his Messerschmitts to stay close to the bombers. By yielding combat at higher altitudes, the Messerschmitt surrenders its technical advantage. On the ground, the Messerschmitt is paying the price of a major flaw in design. Because of its ill-conceived narrow undercarriage, the Me-109 tends to ground loop on takeoff and landing. Even for the most experienced pilots, the plane is hard to control coming in or going out. Within the first 2 years of the war, 1,500 fighters are lost or damaged in runway accidents. The British defense, however, is not without its price, in planes, material, and in pilots. However, the effect of the losses is tempered by a key design element of the Hurricane. As the RAF loses more and more of its most experienced pilots, green pilots and volunteers from other Allied nations are plugged in. But the Hurricane's wide track carriage, in contrast to the 109's narrow gear, proves forgiving at landings by inexperienced or even injured pilots. Precious lives and planes are saved. The air war's balance starts to shift.
Our century will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
Tonight on the History Channel, the FBI takes on America's most notorious hate group, the Ku Klux Klan, on lawbreakers. Then from the loss of Joe Jr. through the assassinations of JFK and RFK. How much do you know about America's heroes?
Who was the good guy?
And what about those heroes who went wrong?
Was J. Edgar Hoover a hero or a villain?
Chevy Chase and his heroic band of celebrities deliver an all-fun, all-family challenge.
I'll name the villain. You name the hero.
Get your pencils ready.
Heroes and Villains on the Great American History Quiz. Monday, July 24th at 8 p.m. Only on the History Channel. Get your score sheet at historychannel.com/quiz.
Nothing like food and water stolen from a precious little azalea.
Thanks for the meal, Red.
Some life we got here, eh?
Yeah, remember the time they sprayed us?
A waste of time.
Didn't touch our roots, we grew back.
Never. Ain't nobody gonna spray us now with all these delicate flowers around.
Right, Red?
Say, what's that?
Roundup kills tough weeds, even your flowers. Roundup. No root, no weed, no problem.
Our century returns to air combat, the race to rule the skies.
The Luftwaffe, driven from its military targets by the British fighters, turns the fury of its assault on the city of London itself. Night and day, they rain bombs on the city and its citizens. With every wave, the still outnumbered RAF fighters rise to the challenge. With valiant effort and superior strategy, the British continue to hold their own against the Luftwaffe. Finally, on September 17th, Hitler postpones Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. After 3 brutal months, the Luftwaffe has lost 1,733 aircraft against the RAF's 915. In frustration, the Nazis begin relentlessly bombing London in night attacks. It will become known as the Blitz. After 8 months, on May 10th, 1941, the Luftwaffe makes one last raid. From 9:30 in the evening to 5 a.m. the next morning, 507 Luftwaffe warplanes swarm over London, blasting it with explosives and incendiaries. The Battle of Britain is over, but the war has barely begun. (1941). Tension mounts in the Pacific. War between the United States and the Empire of Japan could break out at any moment. On Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, it does. Suddenly, violently, destructively. After Pearl Harbor, the United States has only 75 medium bombers, 45 fighters, and 10 heavy bombers left to protect its west coast. The planes have almost no bombs, no ammunition, spare parts, or other essential equipment. Supplies on the East Coast are even harder to come by. Japan, after nearly a decade of war on the Asian mainland, is seasoned, aggressive, well-equipped, and seemingly invincible. The mystique of the Japanese war machine resides in one plane, the Mitsubishi Zero. Four years earlier, in 1937, with Japanese bombers penetrating deeper and deeper into China, the Imperial Navy desperately needs a new fighter with long-range, high maneuverability and exceptional speed. Using a new lightweight aluminum alloy developed in Japan, the tubular-frame Zero's design more than satisfies the commanders. Mitsubishi begins producing these lightweight fighters in staggering numbers. To the Japanese, the Zero is everything that the Spitfire is to the British. The Zero is also the first carrier-based fighter capable of beating land-based opponents. Confronting the Zero is the United States Navy and Marine Corps' Grumman Wildcat. With its thick skin and heavy armament, designed with an eye to protecting the pilot, the Wildcat is slower, heavier, and far less maneuverable than the Zero. While the Zero seems almost mythic in its abilities, the plane is also a pilot's death trap. Lacking protective armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, the Zero sacrifices pilot safety for speed and range. The Americans know almost nothing about it except that it's deadly and seemingly everywhere at once. America's luck changes the following summer when a crashed Zero is found practically intact in the Aleutian Islands. Quickly shipped back to the States, it's exhaustively tested. Its strengths and weaknesses are carefully analyzed by Leroy Grumman and Jake Swerble at Grumman Aircraft. The tests provide a clear-cut profile of the kind of plane the United States will need to match the Zero in the air. And that plane is already nearing completion at Grumman. By mid-1942, within weeks of the Battle of Midway, Grumman and Swerble are ready to test their new fighter. But Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, one of the Navy's authorities on air combat tactics, insists that even more climb and speed are needed to counter the Zero. A new, more powerful Pratt & Whitney 18-cylinder engine is installed. Finally, American flyers have something to counter the Zero. The Navy calls it the Hellcat. By the end of 1943, over 2,500 Hellcat fighters are delivered to the fleet. While still unable to stick with the Zero in tight turns, the Hellcat's speed and heavier armament take their toll on the flammable Zeros as the Allied offensive in the Pacific builds momentum. June 1944. The Navy needs to draw the Japanese fleet into a decisive battle. Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet and Admiral Toyoda's combined fleet converge on the Philippine Sea near the Marianas Islands of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian. Toyota flatly states, the fate of the empire rests on this one battle. The Americans brace for a massive air assault from a Japanese fleet which boasts 6 carriers loaded with Zeros. On the morning of the 19th, the Battle of the Philippine Sea begins. Lieutenant Alexander Vracio and his squadron of F-6 Hellcats scramble from the carrier Lexington. Climbing, Vracio spots 60 Japanese aircraft approaching, aimed at the heart of the American fleet. He dives down onto the Japanese formation, his guns roaring. By day's end, Vracio personally counts 6 airborne kills, becoming an ace in a single day's fighting. By the battle's end, Task Force 58 and their F-6 Hellcats have shot down nearly 400 Japanese fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers. The seemingly invincible Zero, which once ruled the skies over the Pacific, has finally met its match in the F-6 Hellcat. So lopsided is the American victory that day that the air battle is dubbed the Marianas Turkey Shoot.
Our century will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
In our family, men lose their hair early. Thank you. So I've been using Rogaine for about 2 years now, and I don't see any difference. And that's the idea. You keep the hair you have. Look, I love my dad. I'm just not in a rush to look like him.
Rogaine. It's stronger than heredity.
The remarkably agile Aurora. You get inside it, it gets inside you. The entirely new Aurora by Oldsmobile.
Now get the Wall Street Journal delivered for 13 weeks at just 57 cents a day, a 25% savings. Call now, 800-758-7722. That's 800-758-7722 for the Wall Street Journal.
Monday on the History Channel. His exotic stories of the Orient shook the world. But why were cultural curiosities such as the Great Wall and chopsticks missing? Was he ever really there? The true story of Marco Polo on an all-new History's Mysteries. Monday night at 8 on the History Channel. Tomorrow on the History Channel, they wanted to assassinate the Führer. These men planted a bomb that could have brought the World War to an early end. Instead, their bomb plot to kill Hitler would become one of the century's biggest military blunders. Tomorrow night at 9, only on the History Channel. Enter a world where danger comes with the territory. Danger Central. Weeknights at 11, only on the History Channel.
If you lived before our time, who would you be? What if you could choose from 1,000 yesterdays, when the past was today, and the new took your breath away? Who would you be? How would you live? Who would you love? Living every generation before us, remembering for generations to come. The History Channel, where the past comes alive.
Our century returns to air combat, the race to rule the skies.
In 1943, in the European theater, the American 8th Air Force, based in Britain, begins daylight precision bombing of strategic targets. Their B-17 Flying Fortresses are 27-ton airborne battleships, each carrying a crew of 10. Since the Allies still have no fighter with sufficient range to escort their bombers, the B-17 is designed to provide its own defense. But despite the armor plating and weapons mounted front, rear, above, and below in a ball turret, the bombers still go down in alarming numbers. At a range of 175 miles, the Spitfire escorts are forced to withdraw due to lack of fuel. At 230 miles, the P-47 Thunderbolts must return to base. Like patient predators, the Luftwaffe fighters wait for the escorts to leave, then swoop in for the kill. The Germans now have a new one-year-old fighter, the Focke-Wulf 190. Designed by Kurt Tonk, chief designer of the Focke-Wulf Airworks, this 190 is an extraordinary advance in fighter design. Simple, light, yet strong and beautifully proportioned. Powered by a BMW radial engine, the FW-190s can turn at speeds which will tear the wings off lesser planes. With its greater speed, the 190 can break off combat with Spitfires and P-47 Thunderbolts, then return to fight again and again. To combat the 190, Hawker Aircraft races to develop the Typhoon, a successor to the Hurricane. But desperate for the new fighter, the RAF has to rush the Typhoon into combat before adequate testing is complete. During a raid on Dieppe, on the coast of France in August of 1942, a squadron of Typhoons diving out of the sun attack a formation of FW-190s. The Typhoons take out 3 of the German fighters. But the tail assemblies of 2 Typhoons rip away from their airframes. Neither pulls out of its dive. Soon after, all Typhoons are pulled out of combat. Dawn, August 17, 1943. 147 B-17 Flying Fortresses of the 8th Air Force's 4th Wing wait in the heavy English fog to take off. Their target? The Messerschmitt plant at Regensburg, Germany. Further inland and even deeper in the fog, 230 bombers of the 1st Bomb Wing wait to launch the other half of the Americans' daring 2-prong attack. Their target? The ball bearing factory at Schweinfurt. The ball bearings produced at Schweinfurt are the key to German aircraft and tank production. Regensburg is the key to the Luftwaffe's fighter capacity. Success depends on both bomber groups hitting their targets at the same time. But the continued dense fog keeps both formations on the ground well beyond their scheduled takeoff. Finally, by late morning, the Regensburg group is airborne. As they cross the Dutch coast, Focke-Wulf 190s rise to meet them in their Thunderbolt escort. Over Belgium, the 190s attack. The P-47s, now at the limit of their range, have to turn for home. There is nothing they can do. If they stay to fight, they'll run out of fuel somewhere over the North Sea. .50 hours. The Regensburg B-17s have been under sustained attack for an hour and a half. Now, with visibility perfect, the surviving bombers unload on the Messerschmitt plant. While the tattered remnants of the Regensburg group continue on to North Africa, the long-delayed Schweinfurt group enters German territory. The Luftwaffe fighters, rearmed and refueled, don't even wait for the P-47 escorts to withdraw. All the way to Schweinfurt and back, The exposed B-17s are savaged by wave after wave of fighters. Out of a force of 375, 60 B-17s have been shot down with their crews. Another 100 are severely damaged. Many so badly they will have to be scrapped. When the 8th Air Force mounts a second attack on Schweinfurt 2 months later, 20% of its unescorted bombers never make it back. The Allies cannot sustain such losses much longer. The need for a fighter capable of defending the B-17s all the way to their targets and back has become critical. The fate of the Allied effort hangs in the balance. Four years earlier, in late 1939, the British had wanted to purchase a large number of American Curtiss Wright fighters. But Curtiss's new plane, designated XP-46, is still months away from production. England needs planes now. In an effort to help the British acquire a fighter that's already flying, General Hap Arnold, Chief of the Army Air Force, increases production of the P-40 and shelves the XP-46. But the British know that to survive, they'll need a much better fighter than the aging P-40. They convinced Dutch Kindleberger and Leland Atwood of North American Aviation to produce a brand new design based on the test data for the XP-46. After some backroom negotiations, Kindleberger and Atwood acquired the data from Curtiss. Then they assigned their chief designer, Edgar Schmood, to the task of building this new fighter. Ironically, only 6 years earlier, Schmood had worked for both Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf's Kurt Tank in Germany. On August 14, 1940, a mere 102 days after the contract is signed, a prototype of the new fighter, designated NA-73, is rolled out of the assembly shed. 2 months later, it takes to the skies for its first test flight. The new aircraft shows promise. At mid-altitudes, it reaches 400 miles per hour. Its acceleration in dives is excellent, and it handles beautifully. But it climbs poorly, has dangerously limited rear visibility, and above 18,000 feet, where the ME-109 is proving to be so deadly in the Battle of Britain, its performance deteriorates. A promising aircraft, but not the outstanding all-around fighter the British so desperately need. The RAF put it to work in reconnaissance, while the engineers experiment with turning it into a dive bomber. By now, the plane has a new name. Several, in fact. The Army Air Corps calls it the Apache. North American calls it the P-51. But the British, taking a cue from a popular song, saddle your blues to a wild Mustang and gallop your troubles away, call it the Mustang. Then in April 1942, Ronald Harker, a test pilot for Rolls-Royce, returns from a spin in a Mustang with a fresh idea. Just as an experiment, Harker suggests that the Mustang's Allison engine be replaced by a Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same engine that powers the legendary Spitfire. The British Air Ministry is reluctant to waste time on a relatively untested American-built plane. Nevertheless, a Rolls-Royce Merlin is fitted to the Mustang's airframe. The results are stunning. The Merlin-powered Mustang P-51B soars at high altitude. And perhaps more importantly, its fuel efficiency dramatically improves. Long-range fuel tanks are fitted to its belly. Now, for the first time, an Allied fighter will have the range to escort American bombers deep into Germany.
Our century will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
What I miss? Just your son's goal. Oh, I knew it. I couldn't get here any sooner. Force been crazy.
Did you have a chance to set up that meeting about the insurance?
No.
Steve, I know that you're busy, but this is important.
I know, honey, but I just don't know when we'll have time to meet. I mean, I barely made it here. So call Caverna Direct.
Caverna Direct? What's that?
It's who Joanne and I called about our insurance. Thanks, Rob. I don't think we'll have time to meet with them either. Well, that's just it. You don't have to meet with them or take a lot of time. You just call, and they take it from there. They have good plans? Best. And it's not just insurance. We got prescription, vision, and dental discounts, too.
Are they expensive?
No. In fact, we pay half of what I could have paid elsewhere for term life insurance. So you just call, huh? You just call. It's easy. I'll get you the number. All right. Thanks.
Families all across America are turning to Caverna Direct for fast service, great plans, and big savings. If you want to protect your family and save up to 50% over what other plans cost, call Caverna Direct. Caverna is part of the 4th largest insurance group in the country and offers a variety of plans that are simple to get. Call now to find out about life insurance with plans ranging from $10,000 to $1 million. Rates as low as $10 a month for term life coverage, health and accident insurance, and a prescription discount plan that saves money on your entire family's healthcare needs. There's no obligation when you call for a free needs analysis and rate quote, so you've got nothing to lose. Join the thousands of other families who have called already. Call now.
Hey, great advice about Caverna. We called, we saved.
Call 1-877-251-4705 for free information or visit us online at covernadirect.com.
Tonight on the History Channel, civil rights leaders are murdered. Hoover launches a war on the Ku Klux Klan.
Get out of the Ku Klux Klan now.
Then the FBI gets out of control. The Bureau versus the Klan on Lawbreakers. Tonight at 8 on the History Channel, where the past comes alive. Tonight on the History Channel. From grandiose aspirations.
They were beautiful, they were rich.
To political realizations.
They were powerful and they were doomed.
A legacy tainted by scandal, death, and unbearable sorrow. The Kennedys, The Curse of Power. Tonight at 9 on the History Channel.
Our century returns to air combat, the race to rule the skies.
On December 1st, 1943, the first P-51B Merlin Mustangs are delivered to the U.S. 8th Air Force in England. Don Blakesley, leader of the 4th Fighter Group, hounds his commander to give his men the new P-51s. The brass argue that it takes a normal pilot weeks to get used to a new plane, time that cannot be spared from combat duty. But when Blakesley promises results in 24 hours, he gets the nod. Blakesley tells his men that they can learn to fly the new Mustangs on the 245-mile run to their first target, Kiel. This gives them only 40 minutes of flight time in the new bird before they have to engage in combat. But they get the job done. The Mustang performs flawlessly. Blakesley's and his men's daring gamble has paid off, putting the Mustang in combat service weeks sooner than expected. 3 months later, in March 1944, Mustangs escort American bombers all the way to Berlin and back. At last, the Allies have a long-range fighter, one that can outperform the best the Germans have. With its new capabilities, the P-51's battle plan is also revised. No longer is its mission simply to protect the bombers. After escorting them to their targets, P-51s are ordered to seek out targets of opportunity on the way home. They're free to go hunting. And they do, with deadly results. Fighter-escorted Allied bombers now ravage city after city, strategic target after target, deep in the German heartland. Long-range, high-speed Mustangs hunt and kill with diminishing opposition. The once proud predators have become the prey. As preparations for D-Day accelerate, the Luftwaffe is being destroyed on the ground and in the air. On April 5th, 1944, fighters from the 4th Fighter Wing penetrate to Berlin and Munich. Fighter ace Don Gentili in his P-51 personally takes out 5 Junkers 88s. On a single mission in October, Colonel Chuck Yeager, flying in the P-51D he named for his wife, Glamorous Glennis III, shoots down 5 German fighters. One of them is the Luftwaffe's deadly new jet, the MU-262. The Mustang had proven itself to be the premier fighter of World War II. By D-Day, June 6th, the Allies ruled the skies over Europe. On the eve of the invasion, Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower can tell his troops with confidence, any plane you see in the skies will be ours. By war's end, fighters of the 8th Air Force will have shot down over 5,200 enemy planes in the air and another 4,200 on the ground. The mighty Luftwaffe had been defeated. Soon the Reich itself would lie in ruin. Not long after the German surrender, General Karl Spaatz, commander of U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, asked Hermann Goering when he realized that Germany had lost the war. Said Goering, "When I saw that first P-51 in the air over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." World War II was a turning point of aircraft experimentation. From the drawing boards of designers and engineers all over the world came an astonishing new generation of innovative designs. Like species in the wild, the best of these new creations triumphed. The weak faced extinction. In the early years of the war, the Luftwaffe's technical superiority ruled the skies over Europe. In the Pacific, the Zero reigned. But by matching and surpassing these weapons of war, by mastering new methods of testing, construction, and production, the Allies soon closed the gap and overtook the Axis. With new tools, strategy changed. And as strategists sought superiority in the skies above, engineers and designers on the ground rose to the challenge. But finally, it was on the wings of thousands of pilots that the race to rule the skies was run. This race may have begun on the drawing boards, but it was decided in combat.
In a sense, World War II was just the start of the revolution in air power. Near the end of the war, Germany's Willy Messerschmitt designed the first jet fighter. It was too late to make a difference in the outcome, but the jet engine took the arms race to another level as World War II ended and the Cold War began. It's all part of our century. I'm Edward Herman for the History Channel. Thanks for joining us.
Now you can own a video cassette of this program. Call 1-800-708-1776 and you'll receive the program you've just seen for only $19.95 plus shipping and handling. Call 1-800-708-1776.
Coming up next, Scorpions in a Bottle unfolds the secret history of the atomic bomb. Then Secrets of World War II takes you to North Africa, 1942, to go behind the scenes of Operation Torch. And tomorrow night on Guts and Glory Sunday, History Undercover investigates the controversial Allied decision to firebomb the city of Dresden at 10 here on the History Channel, where the past comes alive.
daughter, Janie, went off to college, it was hard on the whole family. Especially CJ. They were so close. Now Janie lives across the country, but with MCI 5 cents every day, we can talk like she's still at home. With MCI, our long-distance calls are just 5 cents a minute every evening and all weekend long, and only 7 cents a minute the rest of the time. Hello, Janie? It's Mom.
Hi, Mom.
Call now to sign up for MCI 5 cents every day and get a low 5 cents a minute rate every evening and all weekend long, and just 7 cents the rest of the time, so you can save every day.
Listen, CJ really misses you.
Oh, I miss him too. Let me talk to him.
Okay, here he is.
CJ? How you doing, boy?
Call 1-800-965-0317 today to sign up and get 120 minutes of free calls when you pay with a credit card.
I remember it like it was yesterday. I was hosting my first big business dinner, and I paid with my Visa card. Turns out I was over my limit. I was so embarrassed, I didn't know what to do. So I got the American Express card, and it never happened again.
Call 1-800-THE-CARD. We can take your application right over the phone.
Applying for the card was one of the easiest things I've ever done, and smartest. And anyone who's ever gone anywhere knows it. I have a place to cash checks, get my mail, and get help when I need it.
My dad said the minute you get a job, get an American Express card. He said, trust me on this one. I've gone everywhere with it. And here's a tip. Sign up for membership rewards, and everything you charge on the card will earn you program points, so you can keep on traveling.
So call now for the American Express card. You can apply right over the phone.
It helped not having a preset limit.
It's great getting points every time you use the card.
I can call 24 hours a day. That helps.
No matter what you do or where you go, the American Express card can help you do more.
How much do you know about America's heroes?
Who was the good guy?
And what about those heroes who went wrong?
Was J. Edgar Hoover a hero or a villain?
Chevy Chase and his heroic band of celebrities deliver an all-fun, all-family challenge.
I'll name the villain. You name the hero.
Get your pencils ready.
Heroes and Villains on the Great American History Quiz. Monday, July 24th at 8 p.m. Only on the History Channel. Get your score sheet at historychannel.com/quiz.
Witness the events that have shaped our lives. Witness the history. Witness our century.
Hello, I'm Edward Herman. Welcome to Our Century. In late 1942, the Roosevelt administration was searching for the ultimate weapon, an atomic bomb that could shorten World War II. Teams of scientists were working on the bomb, but the project still needed a leader, a super scientist, capable of tying everything together. One candidate was J. Robert Oppenheimer, a brilliant physicist fluent in 8 languages. But Oppenheimer had given money to various communist organizations, and his wife, brother, and sister-in-law were all former members of the Communist Party. Army intelligence felt Oppenheimer was far too red to lead the project, but the administration insisted he was the perfect man for the job. So Oppenheimer promised to cut off his communist connections, signed an affidavit saying he didn't want to overthrow the U.S. government, and went to work building the bomb. Our program looks inside Oppenheimer's Manhattan Project that changed the course of world history. It also tells of what happened after the war, when nuclear weapons spread throughout the world, and the prevailing doctrine was ominously called mutually assured destruction. Join us now as the History Channel presents Scorpions in a Bottle.
In 1945, a group of brilliant American scientists harnessed the power of the most fundamental element of life, the atom. But some of these scientists wondered if this new weapon might make the peace as terrifying as the war it had ended. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the head of the team that built the atomic bomb, wrote that the U.S. and the USSR were like 2 scorpions in a bottle, each capable of killing the other, but only at the risk of its own life. This is the story of the bomb that brought the peace and the far from tranquil world that followed. The early 20th century was a time of revolution, dramatic changes that occurred not just on the battlefield, but in the universities and laboratories as well. Throughout Europe, students of physics and chemistry found inspiration in the discoveries made by pioneers of the sciences. Men and women like Einstein, Curie, and Rutherford, who challenged our understanding of the universe. In the Germany of the 1930s, the revolution was political as well as scientific. They were discovering the world of Hitler.
Unser Reich, unser Volk und unser Führer! Sieg heil! Sieg heil! Sieg
Adolf Hitler began a brutal campaign of repression against anyone Jewish and anyone else who opposed him. Those who could fled Germany in fear of their lives. Many of these German refugees sought peace in America. One of the most famous was Albert Einstein, whose theory of relativity had made him the most famous physicist in the world. Now free to work and study unharmed, Einstein became an intellectual and moral leader of the American scientific community. And many of his European colleagues soon followed. Enrico Fermi, Hans Bethe, Edward Teller, and Isidore Rabi all escaped to American shores. Ironically, these men, considered undesirables by Hitler, would help America beat the Nazis in the most terrifying race in history, the race for the atomic bomb. Pre-war Germany had been a center of atomic research. The Allies feared that Nazi scientists were close to understanding how to harness this power. If Hitler developed an atomic bomb before we did, the war would be lost. So in 1942, the very best scientific minds in the country were assembled at the University of Chicago in an abandoned gymnasium, Stagg Fieldhouse. It was a race against time and against the boundaries of known science. Military brass referred to it by its code name, the Manhattan Project. For a weapons project, at first it involved very little hardware. Dr. Robert Oppenheimer and his recruits were faced with the job of splitting atoms in a way that would release enormous physical energy. The first energy expended was definitely mental. Enrico Fermi had just finished experiments in nuclear chain reactions that were encouraging. The cyclotron, invented by physicist Ernest Lawrence, had made it possible to bombard the uranium nucleus at great intensity. Every element of the bomb, from materials to construction, had to be conceived for the first time by this group of men. A theory of how to slow down neutrons with heavy water was advanced by Dr. Harold Urey. Suggestions came from everyone, including Oppenheimer and Hungarian physicist Edward Teller. As these ideas split and reformed, a plan of action was born. Enrico Fermi was assigned the crucial task of constructing the atomic pile. Ernest Lawrence, along with Dr. Urey, would work on the problem of mass-producing uranium-235. Robert Oppenheimer commuted between the scientists in Chicago and the politicians in Washington and New York. These men didn't know with certainty that their ideas would work, but they had the faith of all great scientists, a faith born of their own thinking. Soon, this faith was justified. On December 2nd, 1942, in a primitive atomic pile like this one, Enrico Fermi and his staff produced the first atomic chain reaction. The era of nuclear weapons had begun.
Scorpions in a Bottle. The story of the atom bomb returns in a moment.
Moving on up to the east side to a deluxe apartment in the sky. Baby, moving on up to the east side. We finally got a piece of the pie. Oh, I wanted a home, a showplace, a Taj Mahal. But finding a solid mortgage was harder than finding Bigfoot. So I went to Priceline.com and got my price on a great mortgage, guaranteed closing costs, no points. Look at my neighbor, I'm taking the cul-de-sac. We finally got a piece of the pie.
Mr. Wallace.
Hey, you are just going to love these terms.
Your terms just aren't right.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Mr. Regan, your rates are a little high.
That's not good. What's the word I'm thinking of?
I think it's no.
No.
Want banks to compete over you? Come to LendingTree.com. Fill out one form and get up to 4 offers within hours.
Oh, what a lovely time.
When banks compete, you win at LendingTree.com.
Scorpions in a Bottle now continues here on the History Channel.
At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a $500 million plant was constructed to produce uranium-235, one of the fission materials needed for the weapon. Thousands of technicians and workers were hired to help mass produce this substance. Although few of them had ever heard of it, they knew only that it was top priority and top secret. This Oak Ridge plant and the plant at Hanford, Washington, produced the materials that turned the scientists' chalkboard hypotheses into a reality. In all, development of the atomic bomb involved over 125,000 people and cost nearly $2 billion. The scientists had been gathered in Los Alamos, New Mexico to refine the design of the bomb. They worked out flaws in the prototype and waited for enough fissionable material to be gathered. Soon, everything was in place. By 1945, Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, and General Leslie Groves, the military head of the Manhattan Project, had President Truman's approval to test the bomb. The picturesque Alamogordo Desert had been chosen as the site of the test explosion. Under strict secrecy, Oppenheimer and Groves had directed the delivery of the device from Los Alamos. They also instructed the crew to build a tower so the bomb could be exploded in mid-air. All went according to plan. Early on the morning of July 16, 1945, almost 1,000 observers gathered in the chill, barren desert. Oppenheimer had named the test Trinity after a sonnet by John Donne. Batter my heart, three-personed God, that I may rise and stand. O'erthrow me and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. The nuclear age had begun. This would change everything. But the most immediate effects were political. Germany had been defeated, and Harry Truman, only 3 months on the job, met with Allied leaders in Potsdam in July 1945 to discuss the terms of European peace. On the 16th, he got the coded news from Los Alamos. The baby is born. This knowledge gave Truman a powerful psychological edge in dealing with Stalin. And he insisted that the Russians join the fighting in the Pacific. But he now knew that victory over Japan was assured, with or without Stalin's troops. In the Pacific, the war seemed relentless. By 1945, Allied victory was certain, but the Japanese had promised to fight to the last man, woman, and child. It was thought that the Battle of Okinawa was a taste of things to come. Storming the beaches of this sand-swept island, 12,000 American GIs died in 3 horrific months, more than in any other single battle in the Central Pacific. If we invaded mainland Japan, Truman estimated that at least 500,000 American lives would be lost. With the A-bomb, we now had the means to end the war quickly, with no American casualties. But should we use such a powerful weapon against an almost vanquished nation? The casualty reports cried yes. And Truman also knew that demonstrating a weapon as awesome as the atomic bomb would place the U.S. firmly at the front of the post-war world. The pros seemed to far outweigh the cons. Sunday, August 5th, on the island of Tinian in the Pacific, the B-29 Enola Gay took on a single bomb. The weapon was known in code simply as Little Boy. On the morning of the 6th, Colonel Paul W. Tibbett and his crew prepared to take off. The plane took almost the entire length of the runway to lift its heavy load into the air. The crew had been well briefed about their target. The observation plane sent back word of perfect weather for the trip. At this stage of the war, the shattered Japanese Air Force could offer no resistance, and the flight went without incident. In 1945, much of Japan had been spared the ravages of combat. Large cities like Tokyo had been badly firebombed. But many mid-sized cities were still untouched. Munitions plants and barracks were often nestled in these cities, sometimes existing next to shopping areas or schools. Hiroshima was one such city. It housed the Japanese Second Army headquarters and a large civilian population. They were both totally unprepared for what was about to happen on August 6, 1945. It was a kind of devastation the world had never seen before. The blast had created an epicenter temperature of some 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit. 70,000 people died instantly. By the end of the year, that number would double. One Japanese political faction quickly approached the Russians with a peace settlement, but the offer came too late. 3 days after Hiroshima, the target was Nagasaki. Two square miles of Nagasaki were annihilated. On September 2nd, 1945, the Japanese government surrendered aboard the USS Missouri. General Douglas MacArthur spoke for the Allied forces.
It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion, a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past.
A silent hush fell over the deck as representatives of the Emperor signed the instrument of surrender. General MacArthur then signed on behalf of the Allied troops. The war was finally over.
Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed.
Scorpions in a Bottle. The story of the atom bomb returns in a moment.
Still got athlete's foot?
Don't take it anymore.
Cure it to the max. New Desenex Max. One Desenex Max has more curing power than 3 of these guys. Or these guys.
Athlete's foot.
Cure it to the max. New Desenex Max.
Look, something new for your sensitive teeth.
No way. My dentist recommends maximum strength Sensodyne for maximum pain protection every day.
Your dentist likes it? I like it.
Maximum strength Sensodyne every day.
You started saving for your kids' college education before they were born. Your wife still thinks of you as her knight in shining armor. And the neighbors know your door is always open. So it comes as no surprise that your auto parts are AC Delco. Go Automotive Parts.
Questions and controversy swirl as the secrets of some of the most infamous disappearances are unlocked. What really happened to the crew of this World War II bomber? How did the Hess Crown Jewels end up in the hands of American officers? Why was Jimmy Hoffa abducted? Who were the likely suspects? Unknown fates. Dark speculation. Vanishing Act Week on History's Mysteries begins Monday, August 7th at 8 p.m. on the History Channel.
Inside Prudential.com, there's so much you can do and learn. Hear what our stock market experts are saying. Learn all about IRAs and 401ks. Get an instant life insurance quote, or even find a new home. Prudential.com has all kinds of interactive tools to help you save, plan, and invest. It's so easy to use. And there's always something new happening, from insurance to real estate to investments. It's all right here at Prudential.com.
I need you to find these people now.
Okay, boys. Release the hounds.
Someone's been here.
Searching for someone at your car insurance company after dark? At Geico Direct, we're here 24 hours a day. In fact, one 15-minute call could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Scorpions in a Bottle now continues here on the History Channel.
As peace came, our scientists began returning to the campuses that had sustained them before the war. But total retreat into academia was no longer possible. Their brainchild, atomic energy, had political as well as scientific repercussions, and many of them were thrown unwillingly into the cauldron of Cold War politics. The team that had worked so well together on the Manhattan Project began to splinter into bitter factions, some supporting, others opposing the continued creation of nuclear weapons. Robert Oppenheimer became a vocal spokesman on the dangers of an arms race.
I have been asked whether, in the years to come, it will be possible to kill 40 million American people in the 20 largest American towns by the use of atomic bombs in a single night. I am afraid that the answer to that question is yes. I have been asked whether there are specific countermeasures against the atomic bomb. I know that the bombs that we make in Los Alamos cannot be exploded by such countermeasures. I do not think there is any foundation for the hope that such countermeasures will be found. I have been asked whether there is hope for the nation's security in keeping secret some of the knowledge which has gone into the making of the bombs. I am afraid there is no such hope. I think the only hope for our future safety must lie in a collaboration based on confidence and good faith with the other peoples of the world.
The men who had advised President Truman on the atomic bomb were now cast as national heroes, and many of them thought that America should pursue a peacetime atomic defense strategy. A spokesman for this group was Vannevar Bush, whose opinion still carried enormous weight with President Truman.
The atomic bomb today is regarded by mankind with dread. Men say we must outlaw this deadly thing. Let us remember, first, that we cannot outlaw when we have no firmly supported international law. Second, that men said the same thing about the crossbow, about gunpowder, even about airplanes. Third, that history has always shown that good comes from advances of knowledge, although advances at first are disturbing and startling.
Politics seemed to offer no solutions. Truman sent Bernard Baruch to the United Nations to propose an International Atomic Energy Development Commission.
This is a treaty that is meant to be kept. This is to be a program for which the world has striven through all recorded history and even before. For man in his soul is peaceful and life-loving. Deep inside of him, he knows that he can live in security only by the force of law and never by the law of force.
Andrei Gromyko, speaking for the Soviets, demanded the right of veto. The proposal was eventually rejected, and this early opportunity for atomic cooperation slipped away. In September 1949, the Soviets exploded their first atomic bomb. The U.S. monopoly was over, as atomic weapons, for the first time, were pointed at us. Congress agonized over how to respond, and the scientific community took anxious sides. Dr. Edward Teller, a member of the Los Alamos team, proposed we begin immediate development of the hydrogen bomb, an atomic weapon hundreds of times more deadly than its fission predecessors. The H-bomb was Teller's pet project, and he deeply believed we needed it to maintain superiority over the Russians. Vannevar Bush agreed with him. A minority of scientists, headed by Robert Oppenheimer, were opposed to developing the H-bomb. They argued that an arms race never ended except in war. Oppenheimer urged continued negotiations to control existing atomic weapons, not scientific study of deadlier bombs. But Dr. Harold Urey spoke for the majority.
The question before us is this: should the hydrogen bomb be built?
I am very unhappy to conclude that the hydrogen bomb should be developed and built. I do not think we should intentionally lose the armaments race. To do this will be to lose our liberties, and with Patrick Henry, I value my liberties more than I do my life. It is important that the spirit of independence and liberty should continue to exist in the world.
The sides were drawn, and when India's Prime Minister Nehru came to consult with Oppenheimer and Einstein on nuclear proliferation, the two scientists came under fierce scrutiny. Many believed that if the country was leaning toward building the H-bomb, its scientists had a duty to support that decision. But these men felt they had to speak out, no matter how unpopular the decision.
The armament race between the USA and USSR, originally supposed to be a preventive measure, assumes hysterical character. On both sides, the means to mass destruction are perfected with feverish haste behind the respective walls of secrecy. The hydrogen bomb appears on the public horizon as a probably attainable goal. Its accelerated development has been solemnly proclaimed by the President. If successful, radioactive poisoning of the atmosphere and hence annihilation of any life on Earth has been brought within the range of technical possibilities.
But Einstein's pleas were ignored, as once again politics held sway. In 1950, it was discovered that vital atomic secrets had been passed to the Soviets by Klaus Fuchs, a mid-level scientist at Los Alamos.
Did you ever sign a statement which read as follows: this being part of the application for membership in the Communist Party?
Within a month of the Fuchs discovery, Joseph McCarthy began declaring there were communists everywhere, in the State Department, Hollywood, even in the Army. The threat of communism felt too real, too close to delay the H-bomb any further. In the autumn of 1952, on Algeria Island in the Pacific, preparations began to test the first hydrogen bomb, codename Mike. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were created by fission, the splitting apart of the nucleus of an atom. Hydrogen bombs were powered by fusing two nuclei together, which would create an explosion hundreds of times more powerful than anything seen before. The island was completely vaporized. A mushroom cloud filled with radioactive dust rose 25 miles into the sky. H-bomb testing continued in the Pacific throughout the early 1950s. But with the scientists still debating the dangers of nuclear fallout, proper precautions were seldom taken. In 1954, the crew of the Lucky Dragon was out in search of tuna. Its location, 85 miles northeast of Bikini Atoll, an H-bomb testing site. No one aboard knew of the tests nearby. If they had asked, our officials would have reassured them that they were outside the danger zone. The crew of the Lucky Dragon was puzzled that morning to see a sun rising in the west. A rain of sandy ash came down on the decks of the ship. By nightfall, many of the crew were sick. Their skin began to burn, and they grew extremely weak. 14 days later, these men were being treated for radiation sickness. Their skins had darkened, their hair had fallen out, and many had blood cell damage. In the eyes of world opinion, these innocent fishermen had become martyrs to the arms race. Late in June, 2/3 of the crew were taken ill with jaundice. One of them soon died of this mysterious illness and was deeply mourned by his entire town. It seemed atomic testing was not so harmless after all, and the calls for a moratorium were louder than before, but not loud enough. Within 3 months, the Soviet Union tested a multi-megaton bomb. Between 1954 and 1958, the world saw over 200 nuclear explosions. The deadly race seemed unstoppable.
Scorpions in a Bottle, the story of the atom bomb, returns in a moment.
Want a garage that can fit all your stuff, including your car? Well, now you could win one. Enter the My Garage sweepstakes from AutoBuyTel.com. Oh, one more thing. You could win a house to go with it. Hurry, log on today to AutoBuyTel.com.
Unravel the intriguing facts of history's most notorious crimes. The world of lawbreakers. Tonight at 8 on the History Channel.
If you lived before our time, who would you be? Would you fight your brother, or for the rights of another? Who would you be? Would you find new dreams, or create new wonders? What if you could choose from 1,000 yesterdays, 1,000 lives, when the past was today, and the new took your breath away? Who would you be? What would you feel? How would you live? Who would you love? Living every generation before us, remembering for generations to come. The History Channel, where the past comes alive.
Scorpions in a Bottle now continues here on the History Channel.
The Eisenhower administration watched closely as Americans also protested. Their case was bolstered by the presence of Linus Pauling, the 1954 Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. Pauling believed that nuclear fallout would be deadly to the planet.
One large bomb with, say, 10 megatons of fission means, according to the estimates of geneticists, that something like 15,000 defective children will be born in the future. Children who, if the bomb test had not been made, would be perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. And my estimate, too, there are differences in the estimates of different scientists. My estimate is that one great bomb test means the probable death by leukemia and cancer, bone cancer, and other diseases of something like 15,000 human beings now living. These figures aren't negligible. I am a humanitarian. As a humanitarian, I feel that this is a matter that we need to think about. We have a duty to humanity to do what we can. We have at least to try to stop these tests. We have to try to stop this terrible trend toward self-destruction, toward destruction of the world that is going on now. And this is one way to do it.
Congress listened to Linus Pauling, but they also heard a far different view from the architect of the hydrogen bomb, Edward Teller.
We do not know that a single person will die prematurely from diseases of blood and bone. As far as I could find out by very careful study and questioning, this is an assumption, it is not a known fact. As far as genetic influences are concerned, there is a very high probability, and I would subscribe to it. I believe that there will be some mutations, and if you multiply the probability with the number of people on the Earth, nearly 3 billion, the number of mutations will come into the many thousands. That is correct. Not all mutations are harmful. If we would condemn all mutations, we would condemn all progress as well. I don't like weapons. I would like to have peace. But for peace, we need weapons. And I do not think that my views are distorted. I would like to stop this if we could have a peaceful world. And I just hope I can contribute, and I believe I am contributing to a peaceful world.
Just how bad was nuclear fallout? Public service films tried to reassure an anxious populace.
Dropping back to Earth, the radioactive material emits great quantities of deadly but invisible gamma rays, like the output of a mammoth X-ray machine. Fortunately, the radioactivity will decay quickly. 2 days after the explosion, it is weakened to 1/100th of its first hour's fury. However, until it does decay, unshielded persons in hot areas can suffer serious injury and even death. But well-shielded persons will probably suffer no physical harm whatever. It is that simple.
But it really wasn't fallout that frightened people most. It was actual nuclear war that haunted our dreams. When the Army built a mock city in the desert and then stocked it with imaginary families and imaginary food, nuclear destruction became terrifyingly real. Soldiers filed into trenches a mile from the site to observe. It could be any town, their town. real bombs also kept going off. In 1958, Britain tested her first atomic weapon. Two years later, France, led by former General Charles de Gaulle, also exploded a nuclear device. China soon followed suit. Within 4 years, the atomic powers carried out over 200 nuclear tests. As their arsenals grew, the superpowers knew that unlimited testing was serving no one. In 1958, Andrei Gromyko, representing Russia, and Averell Harriman of the United States managed to agree on an atomic testing moratorium. But the ban only lasted 3 years. In 1961, Russia exploded a super bomb equal to 50 million tons of TNT. And the weapons began to be harder to detect. Soon the explosions were conducted underground. If politicians couldn't stop the arms race, many felt precautions against nuclear war should be taken. Some people built bomb shelters, which could be quite elaborate. This one featured free-flowing champagne and a heated swimming pool. Worried citizens also put their valuables in underground bomb-proof vaults. Even children were taught the fundamentals of civil defense. ID tags and duck and cover maneuvers became part of elementary school. But only a child could really believe there was any hope of survival after a nuclear attack. It seemed the world was spinning farther and farther away from the rational into the terrifying possibility of nuclear Armageddon.
Scorpions in a Bottle. The story of the atom bomb returns in a moment.
In our family, men lose their hair early.
Thank you.
So I've been using Rogaine for about 2 years now, and
They told me to turn right on Green Street, I did. They told me to turn left on Deerfield, I did. They told me to go straight on Beekman. There is no Beekman.
These are the words that inspired Neverlost, the in-car navigation system from Hertz.
Approaching right turn.
Tell it where you want to go, and it tells you how to get there.
Shortest distance.
Will you find Neverlost in any other rent-a-car?
I'm gonna go straight on Beekman.
Not exactly.
There is no Beekman!
On internet time, companies grow in the blink of an eye. But few broadband internet communications companies have grown as quickly as Quest. Because none has embraced change with the passion of Quest. From Europe to Asia and across the Americas, Quest is changing the way the world communicates. Efficiently, effectively, dramatically. Imagine. What could you do with the communications to change everything?
Ride the light. Quest.
Subscribe to Barron's for 13 weeks for just $39 and get this stock evaluator free. It lets your computer help you turn money into wealth.
Call 800-354-3400. That's 800-354-3400 for Barron's. It's how money becomes wealth.
Scorpions in a Bottle now continues here on the History Channel.
At the height of 1950s McCarthyism, Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliance behind the Manhattan Project and one of the most outspoken opponents of the arms race, was denied security clearance, which effectively banned him from high-level atomic policy. He finished his career quietly at Princeton. But by 1963, the national mood had changed, and Oppenheimer was awarded for outstanding service by the Atomic Energy Commission. At an international press gathering, Oppenheimer reaffirmed his belief that world cooperation is the only solution to the arms race.
I would be reluctant to create any impression that I don't believe in disarmament. You all know much better than I what indescribable difficulties stand in the way of negotiating such a thing, and how utopian it seems to talk of a meaningful, effective, adequate disarmament which would protect the world from the horrors of modern war. But my point is a little different. It is that not that disarmament is too utopian, but that it really isn't nearly utopian enough. Far beyond disarmament, one has to envisage a world of affirmative collaboration in the world's work between people irrespective of nationality. It means that the world has to be an open world in which, practically speaking, again, secrets are illegal. It means that some of the major powers, habitually and traditionally resting with the nation states, and therefore some of the responsibilities resting with them, must be in more natural and less national hands.
National hands would never relinquish control of the bomb. It was too important to the international balance of power. But nations did begin to control the proliferation of nuclear weapons. In 1963, Russia proposed negotiations on a partial nuclear test ban treaty. The treaty outlawed any nuclear explosion in the atmosphere, outer space, or underwater. Secretary of State Dean Rusk signed the document for the United States. Andrei Gromyko once again represented Russia, and Alex Douglas Hume, England. Later, more than 80 countries will sign the pact. But the arms race was far from dead. American and Russian scientists simply concentrated instead on aircraft, ships, and intercontinental missiles. 9 years later, Richard Nixon and Russia's Leonid Brezhnev signed the next significant disarmament treaty between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was called the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, or SALT I, and it restricted certain offensive and defensive nuclear weapons. In 1979, SALT II enlarged these restrictions. The Russian military still has a fierce nuclear capacity, but the disintegration of the Soviet Union has ended the Cold War, and the likelihood of superpowers using nuclear weapons seems more remote than ever. But in the U.S. Midwest, our underground missile silos are ever alert. The delicate balance remains. Only time will tell for how long.
After the Second World War, a group of Manhattan Project scientists initiated the Doomsday Clock. a symbolic gesture meant to draw attention to the dangers of the new superweapons. When the clock was unveiled in 1947, the hands were set at 7 minutes of midnight, midnight symbolizing nuclear apocalypse. In 1953, after the United States tested a hydrogen bomb, the clock was reset to 2 minutes of. Since then, the Doomsday Clock has been reset occasionally, usually backward, and it now reads 14 minutes before midnight. As one of the scientists put it, we are back from the brink, but we are not out of the woods. It's all part of our century. I'm Edward Herman for the History Channel. Until next time, thanks for watching us.
Coming up next, Secrets of World War II takes you to North Africa, 1942, to go behind the scenes of Operation Torch. Then Maverick flyer Pappy Boyington is shot down over a Japanese-occupied island in the Black Sheep Squadron, starring Robert Conrad. And log on at Veterans.com, a new website brought to you by the History Channel. Veterans.com, a place where veterans, their families, and others can connect, share stories, and pass on the legacies of all American veterans.
If you need to move faster, we can help. Because success is even sweeter when you're the first one to taste it. Ernst & Young, from thought to finish.
In anticipation of your unbridled success as a Wall Street Journal reader, how to keep your children humble. Give them chores to do around the house.
Hot toy! Time is my money!
Encourage them to play sports. A few tips on being madly successful from the Wall Street Journal. Full of insight on making it big. Get the journal for just 57 cents a day for 13 weeks, 25% off the regular rate. The Wall Street Journal. Call 800-354-3400. That's 800-354-3400.
Sometimes it's hard for him to breathe.
I used to use an inhaler to help, but recently my doctor switched me to a nebulizer.
His doctor said it would be better for him. And it's covered by Medicare. That makes life easier for us.
We found something else that makes life a lot easier. Liberty Medical.
If you use a nebulizer or inhaler to help you breathe and are covered by Medicare, Liberty Medical can make life easier for you, too.
Liberty Medical delivers all his medications right to our door.
And they bill Medicare and our insurance company. We have no upfront costs and no forms to fill out.
Now we have more time for us.
If you're 65 or older, have emphysema, chronic bronchitis, or asthma, and are covered by Medicare, call the number on your screen for more information about home delivery of nebulizers and respiratory medications from Liberty Medical.
Who wouldn't want more time for the fun things in life?
Sunday is Guts and Glory Night. Hit out on suicide missions with Hazmat, the Hazardous Materials Response Squad. Then a bomb plot backfires inside Hitler's Wolf's Lair, and the French Army mutinies on military blunders, followed by History Undercover as Rommel and Montgomery duel in the deserts of North Africa. Guts and Glory Sunday presents Suicide Missions, Military Blunders, History Undercover. Tomorrow night, beginning at 8 on the History Channel.
At the beginning of May 1943, the Allies were poised to seize Tunis and win their first land campaign against Axis forces. Victory was only days away, but the fighting was still fierce. When the campaign ended, 275,000 German and Italian soldiers were taken prisoner. Behind this Allied victory lay a unique operation undertaken by one of the most remarkable submarines of the war, HMS Seraph, a specialist in secret missions. She was about to save thousands of young Allied lives. Seraph was also unique, the only Allied warship in which dual command was exercised between the Royal Navy and the US Navy. 2 captains and 2 flags. A British captain was the 28-year-old Lieutenant Norman Limbury Auchinleck Jewell, universally known as Bill. But for part of Seraph's first secret mission in the Mediterranean, Jewell shared command with the American captain Gerald Wright. Between them, they helped to change the course of the war. Launched in November 1941, Seraph was an S-class submarine armed with 6 21-inch torpedo tubes in her bow and mounting a 3-inch gun on her foredeck. She carried 12 torpedoes, and her crew of 44 officers and enlisted men were housed in extremely cramped quarters, the traditional lot of the submariner. In 1939, the Mediterranean was a naval theater dominated by the French fleet. The architect of French naval power was Admiral Jean Dalland, commander of the French Navy. A French naval rearmament program had got underway in 1938 as the threat of war with Germany steadily grew. But few ships of this program were destined to see much action in combat. Nevertheless, as war loomed, the combined Mediterranean fleets of the French and British outnumbered the third naval power in the area, Italy. France and Britain fielded 3 aircraft carriers, the Italians none. British and French battleships on station and under construction outnumbered the Italian capital ships by 11 to 4. While the Franco-British superiority looked good on paper, it masked the fact that the British tended to concentrate their elderly units in the Mediterranean. And in contrast to the Italians and French, the British stationed less than a dozen submarines in the theater. But the naval balance of power was shortly to be upset. On May 10, 1940, Germany invaded France. German armor and air power proved too much for the French army and their British allies. By June 14th, the swastika was flying from the Eiffel Tower. And Adolf Hitler made his first and last visit to Paris, the conqueror as tourist. 4 days earlier, Hitler's ally, the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, had declared war on France. Mussolini had hung back from supporting Hitler until it was abundantly clear that the French were beaten. He now launched 2 armies across the Alpes-Maritimes to seize the juicy tidbit of the French Riviera. Only 4 French divisions stood in their path, but they held off the Italians with little difficulty. Eventually, the Italians were reduced to begging the Germans for transport aircraft to land a battalion behind the French lines as a token of success. It was an early indication that Hitler's Italian ally would prove a hindrance rather than a help to Germany's strategic ambitions. The Battle of France was over, and its aged leader, Marshal Philippe Pétain, now submitted to the division of his nation. The Germans occupied all the northern and western parts of France, including Paris and the Channel and Atlantic ports. Pétain nominally ruled the rest, known as Vichy France, including France's colonies in North and West Africa and Indochina. Britain's new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, was now concerned about the fate of the French fleet. If Germany or Italy got their hands on it, the Royal Navy's position in the Mediterranean would be gravely threatened. The Royal Navy would have to prevent this. The major units of the French battle fleet were anchored in the harbor of Mers el-Kabir in Algeria. On July 3, 1940, a British task force commanded by Vice Admiral Somerville attacked Mers el-Kabir. It sank the battleship Bretagne and seriously damaged two others, Dunkirk and Provence, as well as the destroyer Mogador. One battleship and several destroyers escaped to Toulon. In the action, the French sustained over 1,000 casualties. The operation achieved its purpose, but was to leave an enduring legacy of bitterness between Britain and France. With France out of the war, mainland Italy and her colony in Libya straddled the Mediterranean. Italy's Navy and Air Force threatened to cut Britain's strategic link between Gibraltar and Alexandria, the base of the Royal Navy's Mediterranean fleet. On paper, the Italians seemed to hold an advantage. They now outnumbered the Royal Navy, which had been forced to redeploy several major units, and they possessed more modern ships. But for all its dash, the Italian Navy was not an asset its high command was prepared to risk in a fleet encounter with the British. Anticipating a British capitulation, which would bring the war in the West to an end, Mussolini was resolved to keep his fleet intact. The commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet, Admiral Cunningham, was a fighting sailor whose principal task was the destruction of the Italian battle fleet and the maintenance of the supply routes to Malta and Egypt. Cunningham could not afford to adopt a passive role. On July 9, 1940, under the command of Cunningham, Admiral Somerville's 4th H, based in Gibraltar, and the Mediterranean Fleet based in Alexandria, had engaged the main body of the Italian fleet between Sardinia and Calabria, inflicted damage on it, and forced it to retire. Cunningham was aware the control of the central Mediterranean and the battlefield of North Africa was crucially dependent on the retention of Malta, the island 50 miles south of Sicily. Malta was heavily garrisoned and defended by aircraft and coastal artillery, but its survival depended on regular convoys from Gibraltar. These came under sustained attack from the Italian Air Force. Both sides took heavy casualties. But Malta survived. In November, Cunningham decided to use his carrier-borne aircraft to launch a daring strike against the Italian naval base at Taranto on the heel of Italy. Swordfish biplanes, obsolete but highly effective, hit Taranto at night in 2 waves. The results were spectacular. 3 battleships were badly hit, 2 remained under repair for several months, and the 3rd never came back into service. The Italian battle fleet withdrew from Taranto. The secrets of World War II will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
Introducing a new line of paper from Hammermill that makes your work look better and brings everything you print to life.
If you're as good as you look on paper, you've got the project.
Make your work look better and hammer it home on Hammermill.
Still got athlete's foot?
Don't take it anymore.
Cure it to the max. New Desenex Max. One Desenex Max has more curing power than 3 of these guys, or these guys.
Athlete's foot.
Cure it to the max. New Desenex Max.
Mr. Wallace.
Hey, you are just going to love these terms.
Your terms just aren't right.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Mr. Regan, your rates are a little high.
That's not good. What's the word I'm thinking of?
I think it's no.
No.
Want banks to compete over you? Come to LendingTree.com. Fill out one form and get up to 4 offers within hours.
Oh, what a lovely time.
When banks compete, you win at LendingTree.com.
You meet a lot of nice people on the job.
You know, restaurant credential? Your wheel has a little tilt to it. I bring the computer with me to every stop that I go.
That's neat. You bring everything with you.
You don't want to keep the people waiting. You want to get out there for them right away.
I think I'm getting a very good value with Prudential. I'm very happy with how quickly they come right out, look at my car, and cut me a check on the spot. Great.
Lunch break.
Sitting at a red light and bang.
How's everyone, okay? At Prudential, we just want to have a happy customer. We want to get their vehicle repaired and back on the road immediately.
Germs. You can't see them, but they're everywhere. And you clean all their favorite hiding places. Or do you? Fact is, germs love wet diapers. So use a Pampers Wipe at every wet diaper change. It'll help wipe away the germs you can't see for a fresh start at every change. Pampers Wipes, cleaning every step of the way.
Tonight on the History Channel, the FBI takes on America's most notorious hate group, the Ku Klux Klan, on lawbreakers. Then from the loss of Joe Jr. through the assassinations of JFK and RFK to the death of John Kennedy Jr., Time Machine traces the Kennedy curse. It all begins tonight at 8 on the History Channel.
And now, back to the History Channel and the secrets of World War II. In August 1941, Winston Churchill met President Roosevelt at Placentia Bay in Newfoundland. The two men discussed war aims against Germany, but their implementation could only follow the United States' entry into the war. For Churchill, this could not come too soon. The waiting ended on December 7th, 1941, when, without warning, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. It was an operation inspired by the British success at Taranto. On December 22, 1941, Churchill, Roosevelt, and their staffs met in Washington. In spite of intense pressure from the American admirals, Churchill and Roosevelt declared a Germany first policy. Hitler's defeat was to take priority over the war in the Pacific. In January 1942, the first American servicemen came ashore in Northern Ireland. They were the vanguard of the mighty army which was to liberate Western Europe. But for the moment, there was some sightseeing to do. There would be fighting enough later for these young men. In the summer of 1942, Rommel inflicted a major defeat on the British 8th Army, captured Tobruk, and pursued the British into Egypt. But his lines of communication were now stretched to the breaking point. And his tanks were running short of fuel. It was at this crucial moment, as the Battle of the Western Desert moved toward its climax, that HMS Seraph arrived in the Mediterranean to join the Royal Navy's 8th Submarine Flotilla. The submarine war was always hazardous, and conditions in the Mediterranean made it doubly so. The sea's clear blue waters made it relatively easy for patrolling aircraft to spot submarines under the surface. And the Italian Navy's habit of hugging the coastline, where the waters are shallow, denied British submarines the safety of depth. On patrol, the submarine's routine turned day into night. When the sun was up, the ship stayed submerged. Breakfast was served when darkness fell, and then the day's work began. On September 19th, Seraph sailed on her first mission, carrying a party of Navy canoeists to reconnoiter beaches on the coast of Algeria. The canoeists went ashore by night. By day, Seraph cruised off the shore taking photographs through her periscope. Seraph's crew already had an inkling that an Allied invasion of North Africa was in the cards, but no one knew where or when. Rumors in Gibraltar were rife. For the moment, they concentrated on the task of intelligence gathering. By the time they returned to Gibraltar on the 12th of October, they were experts on the coastline of Algeria. Unknown to Bill Jewell and his fellow submariners, Seraph had an important ally in the British countryside. Bletchley Park, 50 miles north of London, was the home of the Government Code and Cipher School. It was here that British codebreakers had won a crucial technical battle, cracking the German military codes enciphered on the Enigma machine. Enigma signals were encoded on a machine resembling a bulky typewriter, and then sent by Morse signal to be unscrambled at the other end by a second Enigma machine. To the end of the war, the German High Command believed these seemingly random strings of letters were unbreakable. But they were being read and interpreted on a regular basis and in vast quantity by the code breakers and analysts at Bletchley. In the Mediterranean, the Enigma intercepts, codenamed Ultra, enabled the teams at Bletchley to pinpoint the sailing times and cargoes of the convoys supplying Rommel's Africa Corps. Then the job was turned over to the Desert Air Force. British submarines also took their toll. While Rommel struggled with a shortage of supplies, the British 8th Army was undergoing a massive buildup. The troops came from Britain and the Empire, the tanks from America. The 8th Army's new commander, General Montgomery, was confident that he could break Rommel in a battle of attrition. The secrets of World War II will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
My knowledge.
I registered my hope.
I registered my ambition.
From the network that brought you the people you thought you knew, comes the all-new Biography Channel. 24 hours a day. Step into the shoes of great entertainers, leaders and legends.
I have never been a quitter.
And lives of crime. All tied together with exciting mini-features on the people you want to know more about.
It's a nice balance of humor and tragedy.
Call your cable operator or satellite provider and ask for the Biography Channel.
Can a computer think? Can it learn? Can software be developed that acts exactly like the human brain? For 50 years, that's been the question. Today, mutants are the answer. Using a patented breakthrough of neural network technology, Computer Associates has created the first software that can think. Imagine what this new software can do for your business. Nugent's software that can think.
And now, back to the History Channel and the secrets of World War II. In London in July 1942, the British and Americans had agreed to a joint invasion of North Africa. This was considered as the second best option to a cross-channel invasion, which could not be risked as early as 1942. Torch, as the North African invasion was codenamed, would provide employment for an American army gathering in England and training hard at home. It also provided a role for part of Britain's home reserve, surplus to strategic requirements now that the threat of German invasion had receded. The Americans were supremely confident, but this was to be their baptism of fire. One worrying question hovered over Torch. What sort of reception could this invasion force of untried troops expect from the 150,000 Vichy troops garrisoned in France's North Africa colonies? When the troop ships sailed from America, this question remained unresolved. In command of Torch was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Torch consisted of 3 task forces: Western, transported directly from the United States to land at Casablanca; Central, sailing from Britain and Oran; and Eastern, an Anglo-American force whose target was Algiers. The American and British attitudes toward Vichy were sharply divergent. The Americans had maintained diplomatic relations with Pétain's government and were prepared to do business with it. From June 1940, the British regarded Vichy as part of the enemy camp. In France itself, Pétain remained popular. In North Africa, memories of the British attack on Mers el-Kabir were still fresh. In Central Africa, however, there was support for the exiled Free French leader, General Charles de Gaulle. But the allegiance of the military in North Africa remained with Pétain and Vichy. It was the task of American diplomats to pick their way through this minefield of shifting loyalties. The most important among them was the U.S. diplomatic agent in North Africa, Robert D. Murphy, a man with French friends in high places. With the consent of the anti-Nazi General Weygand, then the commander of French forces in North Africa, Murphy had established an intelligence network. In the weeks before the Torch landings, Murphy was secretly summoned to Washington to make a personal report to the President and General Marshall. Murphy told Marshall that much depended on 3 key figures in Vichy France. The most pro-American senior officer was General Charles Mast, deputy commander of the French forces in Algeria. Mast was eager to organize a clandestine meeting with the Americans. But a much more powerful figure was the enigmatic Admiral Jean Dallon, now Pétain's deputy. If the U.S. was prepared to deal with Vichy, it was possible that Dallon would succeed the aged and discredited Pétain. The wild card in the pack was General Henri Giraud, who had been working secretly to bring France into the war on the Allied side. Dallon had indicated to Murphy that his men in North Africa might turn against Germany if the Americans landed in sufficient strength. It is not surprising, perhaps, that in this maze of maneuvers, Robert Murphy was beginning to lose his way. By the fall of 1942, a major question for the Allies was whether the Operation Torch invasion force would be greeted by flowers or bullets when it landed in North Africa. With the invasion now less than 3 weeks away, it was vital for the Allied High Command to know. They decided to take up Vichy General Mast's request and dispatch a top-secret mission to Algeria to talk to pro-Allied elements in the Vichy military. Mast was given the code name Flagpole. He would be the first port of call. Eisenhower wanted to go himself, but the man chosen to head the mission was his deputy for Torch, General Mark Clark. The dynamic Clark had enjoyed a meteoric rise in the U.S. Army, being only a lieutenant colonel in 1940. Clark had been born into an Army family in 1896. After graduating from West Point in 1917, he had seen combat in France and had been badly wounded while serving as an infantry battalion commander. Clark was not the obvious choice. He did not speak French and naively believed that the French in North Africa would either welcome the Stars and Stripes or be forced to salute it. Nevertheless, on October 17th, the mission was given immediate approval by Winston Churchill, whom Clark met that night at number 10 Downing Street. Churchill told Clark that the mission could save thousands of lives. Clark could not act as a one-man band. As the preparations for the mission went ahead in London in an atmosphere of feverish haste, he assembled the delegation which would meet General Mast, and it was hoped determine exactly what was going on in North Africa. Its members included Brigadier General L.L. Lemnitzer, head of the Allied Forces Plans Section, whose task was to gain information about Vichy French military deployments. Colonel J.C. Holmes, a former State Department official who, it was hoped, could help steer a way through the diplomatic minefield. Colonel Arch Hamblin, one of Torch's shipping and supply specialists, who would try to glean information about harbor capacities. And Captain Gerald Wright of the U.S. Navy, Eisenhower's naval liaison officer. At dawn on October 19th, Clark and his delegation took off for Gibraltar in two B-17s, one of which was piloted by Major Paul Tibbets, the man who on the 6th of August 1945 dropped the atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The American delegation took with them thousands of dollars in gold coins and notes stuffed into money belts. Bribery might be necessary if things turned ugly in Algeria. On their arrival in Gibraltar, Clark and his colleagues were whisked off to Government House, the residence of the Governor-General, General Sir Frank Mason MacFarlane. At this point, Seraph entered the story. Lieutenant Bill Jewell was now informed that his submarine had been allocated to special political operations. The signal from the Admiralty continued, "Utmost discretion in briefing of officers is necessary, and all further orders are to be destroyed after committal to memory." Jewell's flotilla commander told him that he was to prepare to receive some unexpected guests. Seraph was to be ready to put to sea at any moment. The pace of events was quickening at Gibraltar, where Eisenhower would soon establish his headquarters in a war room buried deep inside the rock. At Government House, Jewell discovered just how special the guests were he would be carrying, and the nature of the political operations to which Seraph had been assigned. Not only would Seraph be carrying Clark and his delegation to North Africa, but she would also be playing host to their minders. 3 British commandos were to accompany the Americans, under the leadership of Captain Godfrey B. Jumbo Courtney. Courtney and his companions, Captain Livingston and Lieutenant Foote, were well known to Jewell from training exercises at Scotland's Holy Loch. They were armed to the teeth and ready for anything, but ignorant of exactly what lay ahead. However, the training exercises in Scotland did provide a clue. The commandos were expert operators of folding canvas canoes known as fall boats. These craft were to take Clark and his men ashore when they made their rendezvous with General Mast in Algeria. Unfortunately, none of the Americans had had the time to practice with them. Meanwhile, in Algeria, Murphy continued to play an intelligence game which was largely of his own imagining. In London, Eisenhower became increasingly fretful about the lack of any firm indication of the true intentions of the Vichy army or the remnants of the French fleet, which were harbor-locked but still dangerous. Perhaps Mark Clark, now aboard Seraph and sailing south, would provide the answer. The secrets of World War II will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
5.8, 5.7, 6.0. Oh.
Mounds and Almond Joy, because everybody needs a 5-minute vacation.
The LTX series from Michelin. Tonight on the History Channel, civil rights leaders are murdered. Hoover launches a war on the Ku Klux Klan.
Get out of the Ku Klux Klan now.
Then the FBI gets out of control. The Bureau versus the Klan on Lawbreakers. Tonight at 8 on the History Channel, where the past comes alive. Monday on the History Channel. His exotic stories of the Orient shook the world. But why were cultural curiosities such as the Great Wall and chopsticks missing? Was he ever really there? The true story of Marco Polo on an all-new History's Mysteries. Monday night at 8 on the History Channel.
Do you know what it takes to found a country?
America's revolutionary leaders. We know them as winners. All they knew was uncertainty.
These men didn't know they were going to win the revolution.
It's time to get to know the human side of America's founding fathers.
In another era, John Adams would have needed Prozac.
John Hancock was a smuggler.
If there's someone in America today who reminds me a little bit of Madison, it's Bill Gates, this nerdy, awkward guy.
America's founding fathers, all of them highly educated and committed to the principles of liberty. Some of them slave owners, yet all with one amazing gift to offer the future. A lesson learned from their own failures and mistakes.
I believe that the founding fathers would be amazed that we have managed to survive.
The Founding Fathers, coming this fall on the History Channel.
And now, back to the History Channel and the secrets of World War II. At 4 a.m. on the morning of the 21st of October, Seraph arrived off her target beach at Cherchell, 50 miles west of Algiers. Jewel identified the red-tiled building, an empty farmhouse, set back from the beach where Clark was to meet General Mast. Then, as it grew light, Seraph sailed into deeper water and submerged. She was to return when darkness fell, and at 11 p.m., after an agonizing wait, a prearranged signal light was flashed from the house. This was the moment for Clark, his mission, and the 3 commandos to paddle the 500 yards to the shore. They had taken the precaution of breaking the voyage from Gibraltar to practice the maneuver. Now it was for real. A tense hour later, the commandos signaled and then radioed that everyone was ashore and that the Right Reception Committee was waiting for them. Seraph slipped away into the darkness to recharge her batteries and to wait. General Mast was waiting at the farmhouse, accompanied by the ubiquitous Robert Murphy and a gaggle of staff officers. Seraph was making her way 8 miles out to sea. Clark and his colleagues were now on their own. Clark himself now became entangled in the web spun by Murphy. Murphy urged that Mast should place himself behind Dallon, but Mast claimed that his loyalty was to Giraud. Furthermore, as a condition of his support, Mast demanded details of the invasion, particularly the British involvement. The day passed and night drew in. As the wrangling continued, some Vichy customs officials decided to pay a visit, having been alerted about the comings and goings at the previously empty house. They decided to investigate. Clark and his colleagues avoided capture by disappearing through a trapdoor into the cellar. Above them, while they held their breath, Mast and Murphy managed to convince the customs men that they had interrupted a drinking party. Time was now running out for the Americans. Released from the cellar, Clark's delegation and the commandos returned to the beach, hoping to make a speedy re-embarkation on Seraph. But the weather had changed for the worse. The sea was rising, and the surf was rapidly becoming impossible for the frail fallboats to negotiate. Jumbo Courtney nearly drowned Clark in an abortive attempt to get off the beach. It was decided to wait for the storm to die down before another attempt was made. The men could not return to the house, so they waited in the dunes. The unwelcome vigil gave Clark time to ponder the results of his meeting with General Mast. Clark had refused to discuss Allied plans or disclose that part of the invasion force was on its way. But he had gained some important information: the tonnage capacities of the invasion ports, the French Navy's plans for repelling a landing, and where resistance was likely to be tough. In the early morning of the 23rd, Seraph crept to within 300 yards of the shore. The sea was still rough, but Courtney's binoculars picked out sentries to the east and west of them. It was decided that another attempt must be made. Clark, for reasons which have never been explained, left his uniform trousers on the beach, the name tag unremoved. One of the fallboats was swamped. Documents and gold dollars and a tangle of weapons were lost in the waves. Nevertheless, everyone managed to reach the submarine safely. With Clark, his colleagues, and their escorts aboard, Seraph sped away from the dangerous shoreline. The next morning, the Americans were transferred to a Catalina flying boat and flown back to Gibraltar to report to Eisenhower. They were later to be decorated for their mission and formed the exclusive North African Canoeists Club. By the time Clark had returned to Gibraltar, General Montgomery had launched the offensive against the Africa Corps at El Alamein. After a bitter dogfight lasting 10 days, the 8th Army broke through, and the Africa Corps began the long retreat through Libya towards Tunisia. As the fighting raged at El Alamein, the Torch invasion force was moving ever nearer to the North African coast. At Seychelles, Mast had been adamant that in the event of an invasion, cooperation would be assured by the presence on the spot of General Giraud. With time running out for the invasion, planned for the 8th of November, it was decided that Giraud must be brought back from the south of France. Seraph was again selected for a secret mission. After the meeting with Mast, Clark had promised Jewel that he would have a new job for him before very long. This was to be it. Contact had been established with Giraud, but he would have nothing to do with the British. He insisted that he would deal only with the Americans. So for her second secret mission, HMS Seraph was to become the USS Seraph, under the nominal command of Captain Gerald Wright. Once again, she set sail from Gibraltar, carrying Wright and another American officer, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley Gaylord of the U.S. Army Air Force. Also on board were Jumbo Courtney and his cheerfully cutthroat commandos. But now the white ensign had to be hauled down in favor of the Stars and Stripes, while the commandos struggled gamely to develop American accents. The man they were to snatch from Vichy France was no ordinary commander. He was a patriot, but one whom the Allies knew they had to handle with kid gloves. Giraud was given the codename Kingpin. At the beginning of the First World War, Giraud had been a dashing cavalry officer. The Western Front turned out to be no place for cavalry. Nevertheless, Giraud hit the headlines after he had been taken prisoner with a daring escape from a POW camp in Germany. In the interwar years, Giraud came to prominence as an instructor at the École de Guerre, and later as the governor of the fortress at Metz. In May 1940, with the Battle of France already lost, Giraud had taken command of the Ninth Army. It was a bankrupt military inheritance. The French front had collapsed. Once again, Giraud was captured and imprisoned in Germany. After 2 years of planning, he escaped. Back in Vichy France, Giraud resisted all efforts to return him to Germany in exchange for French POWs. In the autumn of 1942, Giraud opened secret negotiations with General Mast. Giraud anticipated the Allied invasion plans and saw himself as the commander to take over when the Americans came ashore. Absent from these maneuverings was General Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the Free French in London. The Americans so distrusted de Gaulle that they preferred to deal with an adventurer like Giraud or the Vichyite d'Allan. Liaising with London, the French resistance had arranged for Giraud to be picked up by submarine and taken to Gibraltar. The location of the pickup was to be the coastal resort of Le Lavandou. Another British submarine, HMS Sybil, would also rendezvous with a second French party. Seraph was waiting for Giraud off the beach on the night of the 5th of November. There were numerous delays, and finally the general had to be rowed out by a local fisherman. All this made for a particularly nerve-wracking operation for Jules and his men, aggravated by the presence nearby of a patrolling German E-boat, which fortunately failed to spot the surfaced submarine. When Giraud finally clambered aboard Seraph, it was clear that he saw through the deception of Seraph's reflagging. And to everyone's consternation, he spoke perfect English. Giraud also declined to put his name to a political statement prepared by Eisenhower, disingenuously declaring that he was a simple soldier who could not involve himself in politics. At this point, Seraph's radio transmitter broke down. The secrets of World War II will continue in a moment here on the History Channel.
How you folks doing? Okay, sir, what we're going to do is an intoxication test. Shoulder width apart, spread your arms out, lean your head back, and touch your nose. And touch your nose.
Live instant replay.
And touch your nose.
It's mostly for sports. Mostly.
Officer White, I think we got it.
Some televisions have all the fun.
Replay TV.
When work ends, what begins? Will it be panic or pleasure? At American General Financial Group, Alvalic Financial Advisors help over 1 million people turn hard work into a retirement big enough to hold their dreams. It's never too early. It's never too late to start, and it can make all the difference. American General Financial Group. Live the life you've imagined.
Tonight on the History Channel. From grandiose aspirations.
They were beautiful, they were rich.
To political realizations.
They were powerful and they were doomed.
A legacy tainted by scandal, death, and unbearable sorrow. The think.
Well, look what we got here. How you folks doing? Okay, sir, what we're going to do is an intoxication test. Shoulder width apart, spread your arms out, lean your head back, and touch your nose. And touch your nose.
Live instant replay.
Where's the best place to find anything about history?
HistoryChannel.com.
Why go anywhere else? It's the site for information about the Civil War, Egypt, the Industrial Age. Any topic, any time.
It's one small step for man. HistoryChannel.com.
The best search in history.
Well, hey, Miss Palmer, how can I help you?
Hi, Bill. Time to rotate those tires. Cooper tires. Drive on.
And now, back to the History Channel and the secrets of World War II. Operation Torch, the Allies' invasion of Algeria, was now in the last stages of assembly. Too massive a concentration to be concealed from German intelligence. The raw troops were readying themselves for battle. German naval intelligence was watching the progress of the invasion fleet, but had mistakenly concluded that it was a huge convoy bound for Malta. But the watchers were being watched. In Bletchley Park's hutted intelligence encampment, the codebreakers were monitoring every German move. Broken Luftwaffe codes provided the reassuring information that no reinforcements were being flown to North Africa as D-Day drew near. At this stage in the war, Bletchley Park had achieved such a panoramic view of the German order of battle that it was possible to tell that units which could be moved were not being moved. In intelligence, the negative can also be very positive. Hitler and his high command could only ponder where the Allies might strike next. Meanwhile, with his radio out of action, Jewell decided to break the rules by surfacing in daylight. This was immensely risky, as all Allied aircraft were now under orders to attack submarines on sight. Miraculously, the first plane they saw was the Catalina, sent to search for Seraph, which was now long overdue back at Gibraltar. With some difficulty, Giraud was transferred to the Catalina and flown back to Gibraltar, and the councils of war being held on the rock by Generals Eisenhower and Clark. Eisenhower had his prize, but Giraud was proving a prickly customer, and he was in Gibraltar, not in Algiers. In the western desert, Rommel was conducting a skillful withdrawal, harried all the way by the methodical Montgomery. The Desert Air Force controlled the skies. It was now 1 minute to midnight in the Vichy colonies in North Africa. Decision time for the Vichy French forces there and their commanders. Murphy made a last appeal to General Juin, commanding Vichy forces in Algeria, pleading with him to order his men to lay down their arms. Juin pointed out that any such order would be countermanded by Darlan, the real kingpin in the Torch scenario, who was now in Algiers, ostensibly on a private visit. Operation Torch went ahead at dawn on the 8th of November. Central and Western task forces received a hot reception from French naval units. The landings went in amid considerable confusion. At Casablanca, the troops who pushed inland were soon caught up in bitter street fighting. But the crafty Darlan, who had already ordered the surrender of Algiers, could see which way the wind was blowing. On November 11th, he signed an armistice with the Allies. The roundup of collaborators began. Darlan, the man the Americans had always wanted, was now in the Allied camp. Giraud and de Gaulle had been frozen out. Hitler's reaction was swift. His forces marched into Vichy France. By the evening of the 11th of November, the whole of France was under German military occupation, and Pétain's government at Vichy had been reduced to a cipher. On November 27th, the French fleet at Toulon scuttled itself to avoid falling into Hitler's hands. Darlan's triumph was short-lived. On Christmas Eve 1942, he was assassinated by a young Gaullist fanatic. Rommel's days in North Africa were also numbered. He was recalled by Hitler on the 6th of March 1943. The campaign in Tunisia gave the Americans a healthy respect for their new enemy. But the hard fighting gave the men and their commanders the tough experience with which to face the struggle to liberate mainland Europe. Serap's two secret missions were vivid highlights in a distinguished career which lasted well beyond 1945. Lieutenant Jewell and his crew had demonstrated that fortune favors the brave. Eisenhower had no doubts about the value of Serap's contribution to Torch. On his recommendation, Bill Jewell was awarded the Legion of Merit, the highest decoration permitted by the U.S. Congress to be given to a foreigner. In Ike's estimation, Seraph and her gallant crew had saved thousands of Allied lives.
The History Channel proudly presents on home video Secrets of World War II, the complete series on 10 video cassettes for $136.95 plus shipping and handling. Call 1-800-708-1776 to order.
I remember it like it was yesterday. I was hosting my first big business dinner, and I paid with my Visa card. Turns out I was over my limit. I was so embarrassed, I didn't know what to do. So I got the American Express card, and it never happened again.
Call 1-800-THE-CARD. We can take your application right over the phone.
Applying for the card was one of the easiest things I've ever done, and smartest. And anyone who's ever gone anywhere knows it. I have a place to cash checks, get my mail, and get help when I need it.
My dad said the minute you get a job, get an American Express card. He said, trust me on this one. I've gone everywhere with it. And here's a tip. Sign up for membership rewards, and everything you charge on the card will earn you program points, so you can keep on traveling.
So call now for the American Express card. You can apply right over the phone.
It helped not having a preset limit.
It's great getting points every time you use the card.
I can call 24 hours a day. That helps.
No matter what you do or where you go, the American Express card can help you do more.